Lewis Hamilton fastest on the opening day of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix as McLaren make a mess of Friday in Baku. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined as always by lead editor Ian Parks. And Ian, we've spoken about this season in our F1 updates. A fair few McLaren 1-2s, we had one actually in FP1. However, on this occasion, we're starting with a different 1-2 in the form of Ferrari. Fastest in second practice, Lewis ahead of Charles Leclerc. Lewis's lap time of 1 minute 41.293 was actually faster than last season's pole time, so really ramping up already in Baku. And Ian, we know that Ferrari seems to always go well in Baku. Leclerc, as we discussed yesterday, has claimed pole the last 4 years despite never winning at the Baku City Circuit. For Lewis to be immediately quicker than Leclerc at a track Leclerc is good at, this bodes quietly well for the seven-time world champion.
Do we always throw in the
A
caveat,
little
it
bit.
is only Friday practice? And bearing in mind, as you've already pointed out in your
Yeah.
introduction there, Nick, this was one of probably, I would suggest, the worst days of the season for McLaren, given
I
that
think
the
the
way
worst, not far off. Yeah.
everything unfolded, which we're going to go through very shortly
Yes.
when we discuss McLaren and Lando and Oscar's troubles across both practice sessions. But yes, needless to say, that was a very good Friday for Lewis Hamilton in particular, and Ferrari, of course, 1-2. The relief on Lewis's face, and you could see when he was asked the question about his day and his phrase as well, he turned around and said, "Thank the Lord." So you kind of get the indication that this was more than just him topping FP2. Yes, still the usual caveats, fuel loads, engine modes, etc., but you got the sense from Lewis's body language, the way he answered the questions as well that were posed to him in the pen after practice, that this was a very good day for him, and finally they'd found something. He did concede that FP1 was a bit of a mess. He did clout the wall early on, broke the front wing, suffered a puncture as well. So there was a bit of a recovery job that then followed for Lewis and Ferrari. But out of FP1, going into FP2, quite clearly they found something. And that car looked very strong indeed. It is, for all intents and purposes, I would suggest, going to be quite a contender for pushing for those front row grid slots in qualifying. And as for McLaren, yes, we're going to get onto them, but that was one hell of a day for those guys that they're not going to wish to repeat at all this season, you wouldn't have thought.
Well, I think you summed it up actually at the beginning, in that this is probably one of, if not the, not just worst Fridays for McLaren this season, but actually worst days of the season in general. A really difficult day for McLaren, kicking off in FP1, a PU problem for Oscar Piastri needed to be fixed. Thankfully, he didn't lose too much time due to a really weird red flag, which I'll let you discuss in a moment. In the end, it was still McLaren 1-2 in that session, but then in second practice, Lando Norris hitting the wall and breaking his rear suspension, had to crab back to the pit lane. No more running in the afternoon for him. Oscar also brushed the wall, but thankfully escaped without any damage. P10 on the timesheets for Lando, P12 for Oscar. Yes, we know McLaren, when they get their one lap pace in, they will be there or thereabouts towards the top, but nevertheless on the weekend where they can seal the Constructors' title, a bit of pressure that maybe Andrea Stella probably didn't want going into qualifying.
And a lot of work to do overnight, you got to
Yeah.
think now for McLaren, which arguably they've not encountered all season. It's the first time they've come out of an FP2 session on a Friday without at least one of their drivers in the top three.
Wow.
10th and
Some stat.
12th on
Yeah.
the timesheet at the end of FP2. That shows that there is a lot of work to do. Quite clearly, that car looked a little bit of a handful on occasions for both drivers, and that obviously ultimately ended up with both of them encountering these mistakes, because it wasn't just Oscar clouting the wall at the end of FP2. He'd also done the same at the end of FP1 as well. He managed to cover that a little bit by the fact that he ended up 0.3 of a second behind Lando in second place on the timesheet at the end of FP1. But yes, nonetheless, a very tricky FP1 overall for all the teams that encountered it, because we had this, as you say, this weird red flag session. We saw Williams' Carlos Sainz run over a curb that's laid out on the track at the top of turn 16. It's an unusual kind of curb given the runoff area of the circuit that follows on behind it, but it's just laid there in almost like this sausage kind of shape, going from right to left in a curve. as I say, Carlos ran over that. And in doing so, it kicked up what appeared to be this strip of rubber that you would assume is there to help keep that curb in place on the circuit. We saw the comical episode, for those that watched FP1, of a marshal trying to pull what he must have initially assumed was just a piece of carbon fiber potentially, but there he was tugging at this huge strand of rubber that
Poor
just
guy.
was never gonna give way. He eventually did it, managed to get that, but then we had what then turned into a 26-minute delay overall. As again, there was another comical shot of one of the course stewards jumping up and down on the curb to ensure that it was in place, and I thought, "This is just a human being doing that. We've got a 900-kilogram car that's gonna go over that curb at some stage. You clearly don't weigh anywhere near like that, so why are you trying to ensure that that curb is in place? I've got no idea by just jumping up and down on it." But that's exactly what he did. As you say, before that, we had that red flag just a few minutes beforehand, actually. Oscar did encounter this issue with his car. He'd only done 2 exploratory laps at that stage when he had to come in, when he was ordered in, told to ease off, and it looked for all the world like it might have been a terminal PU issue, but as it transpired, and given the red flag that followed, the team were actually able to repair whatever that issue was in particular during that red flag period, which means that Oscar didn't lose too much running, only about 4 or 5 laps compared to the majority of his rivals who'd done 6 or 7 laps by the time the actual red flag took place. But then in FP2, we saw Lando clout the wall really hard, left rear on that. No puncture, bizarrely, but broke the suspension.
Yeah.
Long way back for Lando, back to the pits with his car crabbing, going in a forward, sideways kind of motion, and him having to really hold on to that car to try and steer it straight back towards his garage. And then Oscar again, clouting a barrier, not the wall on this occasion. He was lucky. It's one of those Tech Pro barriers, but did enough, and it was on a lap as well when he was on a flying lap. So he finished down on the timesheet down in 12th position. So yes, overall, McLaren, a lot of work for them, as I say, Nick, which is very unusual going out of Friday into Saturday. Nevertheless, you are still going to expect them to be there right at the front, battling those Ferraris, potentially the Mercedes as well. They were third
Yeah.
and fourth on the timesheet. And then, of course, I think we've still got more to see and come from Max Verstappen in his Red Bull.
Yeah, the bad day for McLaren has given us a very interesting top 10, which I will now read through. So the top 10 from FP2, it was Lewis Hamilton fastest, had a Charles Leclerc, George Russell in third, Kimi Antonelli in fourth, Oliver Behrman, who's playing it safe this weekend, was in an impressive fifth, Max Verstappen in sixth, Liam Lawson in seventh, Esteban Ocon P8, Alex Albon ninth, and Norris in 10th. And you just mentioned there about Mercedes, third for Russell, fourth for Antonelli. Antonelli has had a bit of a disaster across the European leg of the season. Yes, Azerbaijan. Is it Asia? Is it Europe? People
It's
can argue
Asia.
that in the comments below because
It's
they're in the
Asia.
Euros. They're in the Euros football. It's a bizarre one. They're also in
I
Eurovision,
know.
I'm pretty sure as well. But
Exactly.
anyways, it's the
Australia's in
first.
Eurovision. You can't class
It's
that.
a very that's a good argument. Very anyways, getting distracted. But it's kind of the
Sorry.
first semi flyaway race. But Kimi instantly at a track he obviously has not a lot of experience at, looking pretty good. And as for George, quite clearly under the weather. You could hear his voice, or lack of
Yeah.
voice, should I say,
Oh.
over the radio.
Yes, we missed Thursday Media Day
Yeah,
on, as we know, due to illness. And as you say, those voice comments from him quite clearly displayed maybe a touch of laryngitis or something like that going on, because that was a really, really crackly voice. He was complaining about the car bottoming. And we did see that in some of the TV replays as well, that Mercedes was hitting that straight quite hard, going down, as I said, the start finish straight. But nevertheless, third and fourth, both of them just under half a second behind the Ferraris at the end of FP2, so quite clearly a lot of time to find for Mercedes, but nevertheless, not a bad day. And for Kimi Antonelli, yeah, is this the fact that we're out of Europe? Are we going to see him now come good again, as we saw over the first third of the season when we had the early flyaways, and he was, underlined the form and performance for which he was chosen to fill the shoes of Lewis Hamilton going into that Mercedes seat. But then, of course, he had this major, major blip across the European leg. of the season, and Toto Wolff describing his Italian Grand Prix weekend as underwhelming. Not the kind of words you want to hear when you're trying to get your season back on track and try and find some form and confidence again. Hopefully, this might just be that kickstart for him that he needs going into the rest of the campaign now.
And just finally, we've got to discuss, obviously, Max Verstappen and Red Bull, who come into this weekend following what Red Bull found in Monza, obviously leading to Max's really dominant performance. Red Bull expected to be strong this weekend, given in particular the length of the long back home straight, whatever you want to call it. And you may look at the timesheets and think, well, Max in sixth, quite a few attempts behind. That's not great. Interesting comments from Max post FP2 saying that actually, yes, Red Bull need to find some one lap pace. They've got a very stable balance. He was really happy actually with the car. And we've seen this a lot this season where Red Bull on a Friday work on finding the balance, which appears to be their main issue, before on Saturday they just unlock that one lap performance. Max may have been sixth on Friday, but you've got to say, cannot rule him out.
Absolutely not, Nick. Of course, you can never rule Max Verstappen out. We've seen enough poor Fridays from Red Bull and Max to know that they, for the most part, always come good on a Saturday, and that's what I'm fully expecting from Max on this occasion. Was looking good initially for Yuki Tsunoda in FP1. He was just ahead of Max at the end of that
Yeah.
session, and we thought, hello, he's got the new floor on his car, as Max had got for the Italian Grand Prix, which of course we know Max had a great weekend there, went on to win from pole position. And I've looked at the times at the end of FP1 and I thought to myself, Yuki's looking good here. Not quite as strong in FP2 though, unfortunately for Yuki. So he's definitely got more work to do. But Max, as you say, sixth on that timesheet, not a bad position to be in. Just a quick word as well. He's actually sitting in between, as you mentioned, Ollie Behrman in the Haas and Liam Lawson in the Racing Bulls. Both of those guys in those positions on the medium tyre.
Mm.
And the reason why I'm saying that is I think we're going to see the medium tyre heavily leaned on during the qualifying session on Saturday, rather than just the stream of the Red Wall softs. Pirelli this weekend has come into it with a step softer across its range. So this year's soft was actually wasn't used. This year's medium was actually last year's soft, etc. This year's hard was last year's medium. So yeah, there's going to be good a good battle unfolding, I think, within the team strategists determining what's going to be the best tire to use and when between the soft and the medium, because the soft, yes, will ultimately be used predominantly in Q3, but I think we're going to see the medium used a lot in Q1 and Q2 because it has so far proven itself to be a very good tire. And Lewis Hamilton, just to conclude, was actually quickest on both the medium and obviously ultimately the softs at the end of FP2.
Yeah, definitely something to keep an eye on, particularly in FP3, but also in qualifying. Ian, amazing stuff. As always, for those watching, please do smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment below who you think is going to claim at pole position. Will you be right? Well, we'll find out tomorrow. See you later.
Thanks for watching. Take care as always, folks.